Today, I'm going to tell you a story so quiet it almost whispers yet powerful enough to leave a mark long after it ends. Set in the American West, where autumn burns the land in copper and blood-red light. It's a place where grief and duty cross paths, where one promise can pull a life off its familiar road and into danger. It begins with a dying man's final request, something small, spoken in a weak voice, but strong enough to send his daughter riding into a world that was never meant to welcome her. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The fall of 1868 settled over the high country like a secret spoken low, brushing the land with copper and blood red until the hills looked as though they were burning without flame. Leaves drifted down in lazy spirals blanketing the ground, so thick and bright it almost hurt to look at. And the air carried that sharp, honest smell of change, of things ending and other things being born, tangled together, the way two rivers meet and can never be separated again. In a small cabin sunk deep into a fold of land where a creek murmured over worn stone, May Calder sat beside her father's bed, watching the firelight stretch and crawl along walls heavy with a lifetime of memory. Her father, Jonah Calder, had been a doctor, one of the last kind left in these remote stretches. For 40 years he had ridden valleys and crossed ridgelines to treat anyone who sent for him, no matter their money, their skin, or the words they spoke. He had brought children into the world in Apache camps, splinted bones in the cabins of freedmen, and closed the eyes of soldiers wearing blue and gray alike. To him, suffering had never worn a uniform. Now the fever that had stolen so many finally claimed him too, and May could do nothing but hold his hand and whisper prayers to a God she was no longer sure could hear her. May was 24, unmarried by choice, not lack. Her brown hair was pulled back in a braid, meant to stay neat, though grief and exhaustion had undone it hours ago. Loose strands framed a face worn thin by sleepless nights, and her eyes deep green, once like summer timber, were darkened now by loss. She had grown up at her father's side, carrying his medical bag before she was old enough to read, learning how to stitch torn flesh, set shattered bones, and brew bitter tinctures that dulled pain when nothing else would. She had inherited his hands, his instincts, but none of it mattered now. She could not heal this. She could not stop the slow, merciless slipping away of the last family she had. May Jonah murmured, his voice no stronger than the crackle of the fire. She leaned in, pressing his frail hand between both of hers, feeling the sharp bones beneath skin, gone thin as paper. "Don't talk, Papa. Save your strength." He shook his head, eyes clearing with a sudden urgency that burned through the fever. "There's a man you have to find. An Apache. He lives beyond the mesas. His name is Connie." He broke into a harsh cough, and May lifted him carefully until his breathing eased. "He saved my life," Jonah went on. "Long before you were born. I owed him a debt I never paid." Tears slid down May's cheeks, hot against her skin, chilled by the draft sneaking through the cabin's cracks. "Promise me," he whispered. "Find him. Tell him I was sorry I never came back. Help his people the way I meant to." "I promise," May said, her voice breaking. "I swear it." A faint smile touched Jonah's mouth, just a shadow of the one she remembered from childhood, and his fingers tightened around hers with surprising strength. "That's my girl. Brave. Stubborn." His eyes closed. For one awful moment, May thought he was gone, but his chest still rose shallow and uneven. "Your mother, Eliza, would be proud of you," he breathed. "I'm proud of you." He died 3 hours later, just as the first stars appeared beyond the window. May stayed beside him until the fire collapsed into embers and the cold crept in to claim the room. She didn't cry anymore. The tears were gone spent during the long weeks of watching him fade. All that remained was a hollow ache, an empty place in her chest that echoed with every heartbeat. She buried him at dawn beside her mother, beneath the old oak that had watched over the land longer than anyone alive could remember. Only a few neighbors came. Most still feared the fever. But those who did spoke softly of Jonah Calder's kindness, of the lives he had touched with steady hands and quiet mercy. May thanked them with words that sounded distant even to her own ears. Her thoughts were already fixed on the promise she had made. The land known as the broken Mesa lay 2 days' ride away, rising into harsher country, where those who had escaped the reach of the agency men hid among stone and scrub, keeping their ways alive, despite everything done to erase them. May had heard of them all her life. She had treated some when they slipped down from the high ground, seeking medicine they could not make themselves. But she had never gone to them. It was understood outsiders weren't welcome. The wounds were still open. On the third morning after the burial, May packed her saddlebags, loaded her father's medical kit onto the mule that had followed him for years, and rode out beneath a slant of autumn light, cutting gold through dying leaves. The trail climbed steadily, following a narrow ribbon of water as the land grew rougher and lonelier. By nightfall, she made camp beside a waterfall, plunging into a pool so clear she could count the stones at the bottom. The sound of it filled the hollow loud and constant, turning the silence around her into something heavy. She ate cold biscuits and dried venison, wrapped herself in blankets, and stared up at stars that felt closer here, brighter, as if the sky had dropped low over the mountains. She dreamed of her father young again, riding these same ridges with purpose in his eyes and healing in his hands. He was speaking to her, trying to tell her something important, but the roar of water drowned his words. She woke with tears on her face as gray dawn filtered through the trees. The second day carried her higher still into country, where trees thinned and ridgelines rose sharp against the sky. She caught signs of life, a cleared patch of ground, a thread of smoke. But whoever lived here stayed unseen, watching from a distance. They stayed hidden, tracking her progress from behind rock and scrub. Their presence something May could feel on her skin, even when she saw no one. She called out a few greetings in the Apache words her father had taught her years ago, careful, respectful, hoping the sound of them would carry her intent. The land gave no answer. It was late afternoon when the cabin revealed itself, or when it chose to. May had been following a faint trail that seemed to die out beneath her horse's hooves, when the trees thinned and the ground opened into a hard, wind-scoured clearing. There, set against stone and sky, stood a squat log cabin with smoke lifting from its chimney, and a garden reduced to dry stalks and dirt. A man waited on the porch. He watched her without moving, and May's breath caught before she could stop it. He looked to be around 30 tall and spare, built the way men are when the land itself shapes them. His black hair fell loose to his shoulders, catching the fading light, and his face was all sharp lines and quiet strength. But it was his eyes that held her dark, steady, worn by the kind of knowing that comes from learning the world will not protect you. He wore a plain woven shirt and deerskin leggings, his feet bare against the wood of the porch. "You're off your trail," he said, not a question. His English was clean, unmarked, the kind learned long ago before everything fractured. May straightened in the saddle, suddenly aware of the dust on her clothes, the way her braid had come undone. "I'm looking for Connie," she said. "My father was Jonah Calder, a doctor." Something shifted in the man's face, a crack in the stillness. "Jonah Calder is dead." "Yes," May said, steady despite the cost. "He died 3 days ago. He asked me to find you." She swallowed. "He said he owed you a debt. He said he was sorry he never returned." The man studied her in silence, his gaze stripping away her guard in a way that made her feel seen fully and without mercy. Then he stepped down from the porch, moving with the smooth certainty of a hunter, and came to her horse. Up close, she caught the scent of smoke, dried herbs, and something wild she couldn't name. "I am Connie," he said. "Your father saved my mother Sina when no one else would." The debt was never his. He reached for the bridle. His fingers brushed May's, and the contact sent a sharp warmth up her arm. "You've ridden far. Come inside. Eat. We'll speak of debts later." The cabin was larger than it looked, a single open room shaped by purpose. A hearth of stone anchored one side, a low sleeping space occupied another, and along the walls hung bundles of dried plants and rows of glass jars filled with dark liquids. May recognized some from her father's work. Others were new. Curiosity stirred despite her exhaustion. Connie moved through the space with quiet familiarity, feeding the fire, setting water to heat, producing food without comment. He didn't speak while he worked, but May felt his awareness like weight in the room. She sat where he gestured, sinking into a chair worn smooth by years of use, letting the fire chase the cold from her bones. "Tell me about him," Connie said at last, setting a bowl of stew into her hands. About his last days. The words spilled out as she ate. She told him about the fever, about how nothing they tried was enough, about watching strength fail in the man who had always been unbreakable. She told him about the promise, the ride, the sense of being watched on the climb. She spoke of her own hands, her training, the knowledge she carried like both blessing and weight. Connie listened without interrupting. When she finished, he nodded once. "Your father was a good man. He rode through a winter storm to reach my mother," Connie continued. "Others turned away because she was Apache. He didn't." His voice softened. "I was 12. I thought he was something sent to answer prayer. When she lived, I knew goodness still existed." Tears burned behind May's eyes. "He never told me." "Some things are kept close," Connie said, "where the world can't take them." He moved to the window, looking out into the dark. "You're exhausted," he said. "The night's deep." "You should sleep before we go any further," Connie said. May glanced toward the door, picturing the cold settling in the miles of dark country behind her, the empty cabin waiting below that would never feel warm again. "I should leave," she said. "I've already taken too much of your kindness. It's late." Her voice wavered despite her effort. "I can still find a place to camp before night closes in." Connie turned from the window. In 2 long strides, he reached her, lifting her from the chair without hesitation. May caught her breath at the suddenness of it, at the strength that held her steady, the heat of him so close. "You'll stay," he said quietly, with no room for argument. "The night isn't meant for grief or weariness to wander alone." He carried her across the cabin to the sleeping space, a low platform layered with furs and woven blankets that smelled of cedar smoke. And something unmistakably his. Her pulse raced as he lowered her down, as his hands rested at her shoulders a moment longer than necessary, as his eyes held hers with a force that made the air feel alive. "Where will you sleep?" she asked, barely audible. "I'll keep the fire," he said. "There are things that move after dark in these hills." "You're under my care now." He straightened, but stayed where he was, a figure cut from shadow and flame. Sleep May called her. "Tomorrow we'll speak of debts, of promises, of the healing your father believed you could bring to the broken Mesa line. Tonight, rest." She meant to protest, to summon rules she had lived by all her life, but her body refused. It sank into the furs as though the earth itself were claiming her. Her eyelids closing no matter how she fought it. The last thing she saw was Connie's face above her. the hardness eased by something gentler recognition, perhaps, or the first stirrings of something neither had expected. She slept without dreams for the first time since Jonah Calder had fallen ill, a deep, weightless dark that felt endless. Morning light crept gray through the cabin when she woke. The fire had burned down to coals, and Connie sat cross-legged nearby, watching her with a quiet focus. "You speak in your sleep," he said. "You called for your father, for Eliza, and once a name I didn't know." May pushed herself upright, brushing hair from her face, keenly aware of the intimacy of waking in his home, in his bed surrounded by his scent. "I don't remember dreaming," she said. Maybe that's why the words came anyway. Things we bury find their way out. Connie rose in one smooth motion and stirred the fire back to life. "There's food? Wash if you like, the creek runs past the trees. When you're ready, we'll talk about why you truly came." She followed the sound of water to the creek, clear and cold as cut glass flowing over stones polished by time. The shock of it cleared the last of sleep from her head. When she returned, hair dripping and skin tingling, Connie had set out corn cakes, honey, and a dark tea, carrying the scent of mint and something unfamiliar. They ate in silence. May found herself watching him when she thought he wouldn't notice the economy of his movements. The faint scar along his jaw, the silver threading through his dark hair. The thought came unbidden. He was beautiful. The realization warmed her more than the fire. "My people need a healer," Connie said at last, setting his cup down. "The woman who held the knowledge died last winter. No one has stepped forward. The young forget, and the white doctors won't come near us." His gaze never left her. "Your father believed you could learn what we know and teach us what you know. When he visited Sina, he spoke of you, said you had the gift." May's heart stumbled. "He came to see your mother more than once, many times. He brought medicine, stayed to listen, to learn." Connie's voice drifted. "They were friends in a world that didn't allow such things. When the agency men came, he tried to hide us. He risked everything to spare my mother. He failed, but not for lack of will. She survived." He paused. "Few did. Most of her kin didn't. My father Rask didn't." His tone was flat, the words long settled into him. "Afterward, she brought me back here to land they said was lost. We lived like ghosts for a time. Then others returned. Slowly we built again, from what remained." May reached across the table without thinking, her fingers closing around his. His hand was warm, roughened by work, and she felt him stiffen at the contact, before easing slowly, deliberately. "I'm sorry," she said, "for everything my people did to yours." "You carry none of that," Connie replied. "You weren't even alive when the agency men came." He didn't withdraw his hand. "Don't take on grief that was never yours. There's enough true sorrow in this world already." The days that followed blurred together, soft and relentless, like colors running beneath rain. Each one pulled May deeper into a life she hadn't known existed. Connie led her from dwelling to dwelling across the ridge, introducing her as the daughter of Jonah Calder, and doors that would have stayed shut to any other outsider opened at her father's name. She learned what Jonah had been to the broken Mesa line, a rare white man who had treated them as equals, who spoke their words, honored their customs, and wept when soldiers came. He had written letters no one answered, but the act itself had mattered. May sat with the hearth-keepers, learning the medicines passed down through generations. She learned which plants closed wounds, which dulled pain, which cleansed, which harmed. She learned the songs sung while gathering herbs, the prayers that carried medicine beyond flesh into spirit. In return, she shared what her father had taught her: how to set bones clean, how to stitch without wasting movement, how infection worked, and how to stop it. The knowledge met not as rivals, but as kin. Connie stayed near through it all, translating when words failed, guiding her through customs, shielding her from those who still looked at any white face with doubt. She watched how his people moved around him, how decisions settled when he spoke, how children followed him without fear, how elders listened. He was a leader, she realized, if not yet in name, then in truth. The weight of it rested on him, like something he hadn't chosen, but would never abandon. Each night they returned to his cabin, and the unspoken pattern held. May slept in his bed. Connie kept the fire. Neither of them named it, but the space between them grew charged, like a storm building over open land, heavy with what neither dared acknowledge. She caught herself watching him, when she should have been studying, memorizing the way he moved, the cadence of his voice, the rare smile that transformed his severity into something bright. More than once she found his eyes on her, too steady and intent, warming her skin and quickening her breath. The tension broke 3 weeks after her arrival, when an early winter storm tore down from the mountains and sealed them inside with nothing but firelight and wind. Snow drove against the walls as if alive. May huddled beneath the blankets that had become her bed, while Connie fed the fire with the focus of a man guarding against wolves. "Tell me about your life," she said, suddenly needing sound anything but her own thoughts. "Before I came. What filled your days?" Connie sat back, firelight, carving his face in gold and shadow. "I hunted, fished, helped where I was needed. I read the books my mother Sina saved from before the removals. Learned what she wanted me to know." He hesitated. "I waited," he said. "I didn't know for what. Now I do." He crossed to her, lowering himself onto the edge of the bed, with a grace that stole her breath. "I was waiting for you," May called her. "For someone who would see me as a man, not a threat. Someone who could learn our ways without trying to erase them. Someone who looks at me the way you do now." Her throat tightened. "How am I looking at you, as if you want to touch me?" He said softly, "And you're afraid of what it would change." He lifted a hand slowly, giving her time to pull back, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. His fingers traced her jaw, came to rest at the corner of her mouth. "I've looked at you the same way since the day you rode into my clearing, with grief in your eyes and strength in your spine." "This can't work," she whispered, though she didn't move. "Our people, this world has already taken my father, Rask. It took my land, my future," Connie said. "I won't let it take this too." His thumb brushed her lower lip, and the touch traveled through her like heat. "I'm not asking for forever. I'm asking for now." May closed the space between them, her mouth finding his. The kiss began careful, then deepened as weeks of restraint broke apart. His arms drew her close, the warmth of him seeping through cloth and skin, his heart hammering in time with the storm raging beyond the walls. He eased her down onto the furs, with a care that felt almost reverent, his hands unsteady as they worked the buttons of her dress, pausing each time as if asking permission before continuing, waiting for her quiet assent. May helped him free the rest of her clothing, then his. And when they finally lay skin to skin, tears slid from her temples without warning. It was everything she hadn't known. She was missing this closeness, this sense of completion, this feeling of arriving somewhere she had never been before. Outside, the storm raged on while they found a shared rhythm in breath and touched two lives from different worlds, speaking a language that needed no words. Connie was patient, deliberate, learning her body the same way he knew the land, slowly, with respect, discovering paths she hadn't known existed. May gave herself to him without hesitation or fear, trusting him in a way she never had. before feeling safe for the first time since Jonah Calder had died. When it was over, they lay wrapped together in the firelight, her head resting on his chest, his fingers tracing quiet patterns along her back, like symbols from a tongue she was only beginning to understand. The storm softened as the night wore on, the wind-fading snow falling in hushed taps against the windows. "Stay," Connie said quietly. "Not just tonight. Stay here with me with the broken Mesa line. Be our healer. Help me build something new from what's been left." May lifted her head, looking at him, realizing how deeply he had already rooted himself in her life. "We hardly know each other," she said. "Then we'll learn," he answered. "There's time if we choose it." He held her face between his hands, his gaze steady, unflinching. "I'm not asking you to abandon your world. I'm asking you to widen it. Let mine be part of it. Help me bridge what was with what could be." May thought of the empty cabin below the ridge of the life that had never quite fit her, of the promise she'd made beside a dying bed. She thought of the patients she had tended in recent weeks, the children who ran to meet her, the smiles she was beginning to earn from the hearth-keepers. She thought of the knowledge she was gaining, the medicines she was learning, the purpose slowly filling the hollow inside her. "Yes," she said at last. "I'll stay." Connie's smile broke over her like dawn after a long winter, like the return of hope she had forgotten how to expect. He drew her close, kissed her with a tenderness that left her shaking, and they held each other as the storm passed stars, emerging above a world freshly dusted with snow. The months that followed tested her. Some among his people never fully trusted her, their suspicion easing only inch by inch. There were days when customs clashed and mistakes cut deep nights, when grief for her father pressed so hard she could scarcely breathe, the nights when only Connie's arms anchored her. But there was joy too fierce and unexpected. She brought children into the world, closed wounds, learned songs older than memory. She taught the young to read and write in English and Apache alike, believing knowledge was a kind of shield. In time, she married Connie in a ceremony that joined their traditions beneath an endless blue sky, witnessed by a people who had become her own. On the anniversary of Jonah Calder's death, May climbed to the highest rise above the mesas and looked out across the vast sweep of land. Autumn had returned, painting the earth in familiar fire, and she felt the long arc of her journey come full circle. "Thank you, Papa," she whispered to the wind, "for leading me here." She sensed Connie behind her. Before she heard him, felt his arms settle around her waist, his lips brush her hair. Together, they watched the sun sink low. "What are you thinking?" he asked softly. May leaned back against him, feeling his heartbeat, aware of the quiet life growing within her that they had only begun to name. "That some debts can't be repaid," she said. "They can only be carried forward." His hold tightened, and she knew he understood. They had lost, much endured, what could never be undone. Yet they had found each other, and in that a purpose strong enough to defy history. As night gathered and stars emerged, the same ones that had watched these lands since the beginning, two hearts beat together, shaping a story meant to last beyond them, of love, without borders, of healing, beyond culture, of hope, strong enough to endure. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blaze the trail. Subscribe, share. Leave your thoughts in the comments and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you. Aviso legal/disclaimer. These stories are crafted purely for entertainment and may contain imaginative additions or dramatic interpretations inspired by old frontier eras. We use AI-based resources voice imagery and drafting as part of our creative process. But every final detail is carefully reviewed and shaped by human effort to preserve emotional depth and authenticity. We strictly follow YouTube's rules regarding AI-generated content and refrain from deepfakes, altered identities, or misleading representations. All images, sounds, and related materials are lawfully obtained. Please do not reuse, modify, or distribute any portion of this content without written permission. Thank you for valuing creativity, respect, and original work.